Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's session on Tech Tuesdays. This is our debut session of Tech Tuesdays, and we're going to be talking about better business intelligence and how to perform data replication for cloud applications. Joining me today is Ron Lunasson, our Senior Director of Cloud Platform Adoption and 18-year Informatica veteran. So before we get into the full agenda of Tech Tuesdays, let me first outline the goals of Tech Tuesdays. Essentially, it's going to be happening every week, and the main goal is to share some of the technical insights around cloud integration with our Informatica and Informatica Cloud customers. We're also going to be exploring a lot of the new cases for adopting Informatica Cloud. So we're going to do a lot of deep dive into some of the features of Informatica Cloud in subsequent sessions. And finally, the aim of this is to also introduce Informatica's customers to our Informatica Cloud subject matter experts, our product management team, as well as our engineering team. So let's look at today's agenda. First, we're going to talk about business intelligence for cloud applications and what's really different when you're performing BI for a cloud application. We're then going to go into a demo with Ron Lunasson, and he's going to go into various different features of the data replication service within Informatica Cloud. Things such as replicated, deleted, and archived rows, automatically creating database tables, what a full load means versus incremental load, and as well as what the Salesforce bulk API is supposed to be used for. Then we'll have some Q&A, and we'll wrap up with some tips for success with the data replication service, and I'll also go a little bit into next week's session. So most of you that are Informatica customers been involved with analytics and BI for many years now, and it continues to be a top priority among CIOs. Last year in 2012, it was the #1 technology priority, and this year for 2013, it's also the #1 technology priority. And what you'll notice here is that analytics and BI are directly correlated with the business unit priority of increasing enterprise growth. So let's look at the typical data warehousing process. And most of you are very familiar with this, that you have a lot of disparate systems such as ERP, many HR systems, some on-premise CRM systems, and even some legacy systems. And you need to bring all this data into a staging database and performing transformations and push the data into a data warehouse from where it can be picked up by your BI and reporting team so that they can go ahead and build their cubes and build their reports. But when it comes to cloud applications such as Salesforce, for instance, what's different? Well, the process is essentially the same in that you have to push the data to a staging database and then eventually push it into a data warehouse. But what's different is that cloud applications operate in a much more agile manner than do on-premise applications. So as you can see for one of our customers at Toshiba, the reason they chose Salesforce is because they were able to add many fields in a relatively short amount of time. And when you add those fields, it's important to incorporate those fields in your overall data integration process when you're performing business intelligence. But if you can't get those changed fields or the additional fields in time, it slows down your entire BI process. So just to go into a little bit more detail into how easy it is to build these custom fields, here's a screenshot of the Salesforce setup page. So if you go under the setup page in Salesforce, you can view an entire list of standard out-of-the-box fields and objects. This particular object, for instance, is a standard object called Price Book, and it comes with a lot of standard fields. But if you wanted to create a custom field, you'd be able to do that really in a matter of minutes. You just click on New, add the relevant dependencies, and these new custom fields are live. Not only can you create custom fields to standard objects, you can also create new custom objects itself. So similar to how you create custom fields, if you go into the setup option within Salesforce, you can easily define new custom objects, and you're up and running. So here to take you through a demo of Informatica Cloud Data Replication, I'm going to bring on board Ron Lanasson, and he's going to show you why it's important to deal with all these different permutations and combinations of custom fields and custom objects when you're performing a data replication process to get that data ready into your overall BI process. Ron, take it away.
What you'll see here is I'll actually go through this demo very, very quickly. And I think that really speaks to the benefit of what the solution does. It's very specific to this use case, hence it's very easy to use. All right, so step one, I'm just giving it a name so I can keep track of this over time. And I choose my source. Now, again, you can actually use the replication capability here for replicating on-premise data to other on-premise targets. But the most common use case is choosing Salesforce as our source. And if we actually went ahead and take a look at my source connection details, all I'm specifying here is my standard Salesforce credentials. So we're going through the standard Salesforce API when we're connecting and performing the replication. I now have two options that I can choose. I can choose to either replicate all objects, and it actually does exactly that. It'll go off and grab the 200 plus objects inside of the Salesforce schema that your login user has read access to, and it'll replicate all of them. Or I can individually choose and select the objects that I'm interested in from a reporting standpoint. Now, for the sake of time, because I actually am going to run this live, I'll just choose the account and the contact object, so I can show those two being replicated. But you can pick and choose any objects you want. And as Ashwin talked about, you also have the capability of picking custom objects as well. So you'll see all of those designated with the __C, and that's your standard Salesforce notation that you're looking at a custom object. All right, so this replication works for all standard and custom. All right, so I've chosen my two demo objects. And if we take a look at this option down below, cancel processing. So again, if we have a whole list of objects, and if one object happens to fail for whatever reason, or network issue or something along those lines, it'll just go ahead and stop the process and have you take a look and see what's going on. Most customers, however, will have the continue, so that if there's an issue with one particular object, maybe some permissions have been changed, it'll skip that object and move on to the next so that you can have all of your other data replicated. This checkbox here specifies whether to deal with having a true replica, in the sense that if you have a Salesforce object and you delete a row, if you do not check this box, what will happen is when you run your data replication, it'll actually go through and also delete the row from your local database. But if you have this checkbox turned on, we will actually just mark the row locally in your local database as is deleted, so you can see that it was deleted, but we will retain the row for historical or archive purposes. So that's what that checkbox is for. Okay, next step, step 2, where am I actually going to replicate this to? I'm going to choose my local SQL database, and if we take a look at the details, here we see that we're connecting using our standard ODBC-like connectivity. And the reason for that, we didn't go through an architecture diagram here, but we do have a component that you download the very first time that you log into Informatica Cloud. It's something that we call our secure agent. It's a one-time download, it's self-updating and self-upgrading, so you never have to worry about it ever again once you download it. And then what that component does is, because it's downloaded and sitting behind your firewall, that's how we have direct access to this local database. One thing to note from a security standpoint, the way that we've architected this, and if you have any questions about this, reach out to your Informatica Cloud representative and we can go into the details. but we make outbound connections from the secure agent to Informatica Cloud. And basically what that boils down to is you do not need to open up any ports in the firewall for inbound traffic. As long as you can connect to the internet via SSL or HTTPS from the agent machine where you install the secure agent. So as long as you can connect to the internet through a browser, then you should be able to use this without having to change any of your firewall or security rules. Very important part, and goes back to the whole ease of use around Informatica Cloud. Okay, so I've chosen my SQL database. By default, we're adding a table prefix, SF underscore. This helps you tag these objects. You can change this to whatever you want, but I usually just keep the default. All right, next up, we have the choice between incremental and full load. This is one of the key value propositions of the service. The very first time that we run, what this service will do is it'll look at the schema of your Salesforce objects, and it'll dynamically create the script to generate the tables in your database to look exactly like your Salesforce objects. So that's the first thing it does. The second thing that it does, or I should say in the very initial load, of course, will move all the data over. All subsequent loads, based off of these two radio buttons, if you have incremental load turned on, when we're pulling from Salesforce, we're going to make the appropriate API calls to only pull over changed data. So if you have 2 million account rows, the first time, of course, we'll move all 2 million, but the next time that you run it, only 10 rows have changed. If you have the incremental load turned on, then we'll only pull over the 10 rows. If you have full load turned on, what we do there is we basically do a truncate and reload so that you've got a full refresh of that data. There's various reasons why you might want to go with one or the other. Most people will have incremental load, but some people will have full load checked in case they just want to purely have a snapshot of the data on a daily basis. Then you would use full load. Okay, and then the last set of radio buttons on the screen, remove or retain deleted columns. It's very similar to that archive radio button or checkbox in the first screen. If you have remove deleted columns and rows, what that will do is if you have in Salesforce, if you actually delete columns, it will go and do the alter table and drop columns on your table if you have this radio turned on. Most people want to retain all data that was there at some point within Salesforce. So if you have this second radio button turned on, if there is a column that's deleted on Salesforce, we will not do the alter table to drop that column. We'll just keep that there, but of course all subsequent rows will just have that filled in as null. Okay, step 3. Actually, if you wanted to, you could simply save and start running this with just going through the first 2 steps. And actually, quite a few customers just do that. Go 1 and 2 save, and then they'll just start doing replication. Step 3 is, again, it's an optional step. It allows you to go off and choose fields to exclude. Now, this can be quite a good feature for Salesforce customers, especially customers that have been using Salesforce for a long time. As Ashwin talked about, it's very easy to create a lot of custom fields. But what ends up happening oftentimes is people create more custom fields than they're actually being used, and there's just no need to replicate them over because there's no data that's of any meaningful value. So you can go and pick and choose and remove columns that you're not using so that you don't have to store those in your local copy just because you're not using them. Just as an example, just so that we can see that, I'll just remove the shipping fields just so you can see this in action. All right. Step 4, again, optional, but you can limit the number of rows that you're pulling over. You can add very specific data filters. The value here is that if you want to do data replication for a very specific group, you could put in filters. Let's say if you only wanted to do this for the eastern region, for instance, you could put in a data filter where you're actually filtering where the region is of a specific area. So you have all the capabilities to pick and choose and really zoom in to the data that you're interested in. And then the last step is our scheduler. Most people will run these on a schedule, and you can just simply go off and choose a schedule that you've already created. If this is the first time that you're doing this, you can create whatever schedule you'd like. And as you can see, we've got a lot of options on building schedules. And if we scroll down to the bottom, I think the most important, there's some advanced features, but really down here below, Salesforce API, Standard API, or Bulk. And here I'm just going off and choosing the Bulk API. Okay, so let me go ahead and save this. And we'll go ahead and run it. Now, before I run it, let me just go into my SQL database so we can see this working in action. All right, so drill in, take a look at my tables, and we don't see any SF underscore tables here. So now I will run my TechTuesday demo. And what this solution is going to do, as I mentioned earlier, the very first time that we run, we know that it's the first time. We're connecting to Salesforce, looking at the schema, all their standard and custom objects, and we're going off and actually dynamically generating the DDL scripts to create those tables. So we're creating the account and contact tables to look exactly like they look like in Salesforce. All right, so now if I go into here and do a refresh, let's see if we've already done. Yeah, there they are. SF underscore account, SF underscore contact. And what you'll see, if we take a look at the columns, is we see the billing addresses, but you do not see any of the shipping. All right, so again, we've created everything and excluded the fields that we've chosen to exclude. We see it's done, and we've loaded the data over as well. Now, the real value of the replication offering, though, is what happens when you run it the next time. Now, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to log into Salesforce, and I'll go ahead and add a custom object, or a custom field, I should say. Let me add a custom field to the account object. So I'll go here, customize, go to the accounts, go to fields, and let me just create a new custom field. And I'll just make it a simple number field. We'll call it TechTuesday. So it's length 18, decimal place is 0, that's fine. Next, and next, and save. All right, so now we've got a custom field that's been created inside of Salesforce. All right, so now what happens when we go back to the replication offering, and let's just go ahead and rerun it. Now this really is the value. The next time this runs, the very first thing that we do is we connect to Salesforce and look to see, have there been any changes to the underlying schema? And if there are, which we just showed, we will perform dynamically. You don't have to do anything. We will dynamically create an alter table statement to add that new field. So if we go in and do a refresh here, what we should see is TechTuesday __ C has automatically been created. Now I didn't add any new fields, so we see here that no fields have been moved over, which is to be expected because I didn't add anything. But if you had the incremental turned on, which I do, and you had new fields created, you would only see those new columns, those new rows moved over, and you'd see any new fields or altered fields also apply directly to your local schema. All right, so very, very powerful offering, but as you saw, it only took me a few minutes to go through that wizard.
So we'll get to the Q&A because we have several questions that have come on board, but before we do that, let's quickly go into some key learnings for success. So you have to ensure that every database user has relevant privileges to create, delete, drop, insert, select, and update in order to use data replication service. Also know that full loads are better for taking snapshots of data. So you saw in the demo that Ron showed that you could select between two radio buttons, between a full load and between an incremental load. And select the full load option if you desire to take different snapshots of data at different points in time, whereas incremental loads are better for your ongoing reporting purposes and just moving over data that has changed.
Yeah, and just a quick point there, and it's exactly what Ashwin just talked about. If people really have more of an archiving use case, oftentimes they'll lean towards doing a full load, where incremental load, we've seen customers run as often as every 5 minutes for a few objects. It does take up some of your API usage, so it really I would choose carefully on which objects you want to run on a more often basis, but typically you'll use incremental loads for reporting, full loads for archive.
Great. And the final tip is to obviously leverage the Salesforce bulk API for maximum performance and agility with your BI processes. So in the remaining time that we have, let's get to some of the questions that our viewers have asked. So the first question here talks about whether we can move Salesforce data into multiple database tables and multiple databases, really.
Yes, and the answer is yes. You can create different replication tasks. So you saw me create the TechTuesday task. So you can replicate from the same tables as long as you're pointing to either a different database, or if you're pointing to the same database, you need to change the table prefix so that we're not going to override the other tasks that are out there. So that's very common where, again, if you've got different groups that want their own snapshot or their own local copy, that you could do that. That's not a problem.
Great. The next question here is around the Salesforce bulk API. There's a question around when should users use the standard API versus when to use the bulk API.
So you should use, it's recommended that you use the bulk API, especially if you're doing snapshot data. Bulk is going to be better for that. The only reason why we have that as an extra feature or as an extra checkbox is we added bulk API functionality a couple of years ago, which came out after we first released the product. So that's why it's kind of a separate checkbox.
Great. And the last question that we have, just because we're slightly running out of time here, is whether the rows that have been deleted from Salesforce can also be transferred in a data replication task.
Yes. So there in the step 1 of the wizard that we showed you, when you have that checkbox on for retrieving deleted rows and archive rows, technically what we end up doing there is we're making the query all API call versus the standard query call. So we are going off and grabbing all records that have been soft deleted from Salesforce. So we're going to grab those and just mark them as is deleted rather than performing an actual delete on the target. So that, again, retains that row.
Great. So thanks a lot for joining us today, Ron. And next steps, if you would like to try out data replication, please do get in touch with your account manager to enable that functionality within your Informatica Cloud account. Do join the Informatica Cloud community. You'll see a lot of discussions around the different features of Informatica Cloud. And as mentioned before, next TechTuesday session is actually going to talk about big data and how big data is going to really change the paradigm of business intelligence. And the specific aspect of big data that we'll be talking about is Amazon Redshift. Thank you once again for attending the first session of Tech Tuesdays. There were a lot of questions that were asked, and sorry we couldn't get to all of them, but we will get back to you individually. Thanks once again, and see you next week.